So as far as my first experience with him,
yeah,
this was some that's always stuck with me, and because it was, I'd never ever had this happen to me in my life. But when I rented the apartment up on First Avenue, I think it was like I think the address was like 565 First Avenue.
yes.
The owner of the building was showing me the property, and as we were inside the unit, we walked into the living room, which faced the street, and this guy comes walking up the sidewalk, and when I looked at him, all the hairs just went up on the back of my neck. And then the guy said, "Oh, that's your apartment house manager." And I watched him come up, and then he turned and went on the other side of my house, and I just was freaked out by the very first time I'd ever seen him, and I don't even know why.
Wow.
Had never heard of him, nothing, but that was just the very first experience I had with Ted.
How long?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm interrupting you. How long did you live there?
Oh boy, we were there. I'm trying to think of the dates because we moved in like early spring, and then we lived there all during the summer. And then after Ted got arrested, I remember there was an apartment upstairs opened up, and I was living with my girlfriend on the main level in the biggest apartment in the house. So if you ever see a picture of the house, I had the whole lower level on the left-hand side.
Okay, yeah, I've been over there several times. I'm pretty familiar with the layout, so I can pick
Okay, so my apartment, I had my front room, living room was on the front of the building, and my kitchen was on the very back where everybody parked their cars.
Okay.
And another weird thing is, right underneath my kitchen window, I had an exit door to go right out on the back side by the parking lot. But there was this little underground storage thing where you would lift up kind of like an awning thing, and then there were stairs to go down. And Ted would go down there all the time. He spent a ton of time down there at nighttime. Like in the middle of the night, I'd hear, like, because you could hear it when he'd open the hatch up and stuff, and we'd be in the bedroom asleep, but you could hear him lift that thing up and then close it. It would kind of come down with a bang. Well, it was actually not completely on the backside. It was more on the side of the house, but it was near the backside.
But the entrance to that was on the backside or the side, or?
On the side. So if you ever went back to the house and you're looking at the parking lot, instead of coming down the driveway, it's on the other side where there's a sidewalk, and you'd walk down. There was a door to come in the apartment on the main level. That's where I lived, and then right next to my door, you'd lift up the awning.
Okay.
And then there was a stairway that went down, and then you could walk right by it and not even know what it was.
Okay.
The awning completely closed down over it. But then when you'd lift it, you'd put a board in place so you could go down the stairs. And I know after the whole thing, after I moved out, and then all the information you started getting in the news and stuff, it made me wonder if Bundy was bringing home body parts and keeping them down there. Just always freaked me out after years later when I thought about it. And I don't know if the cops ever even, when they came and searched his apartment, I don't know if they knew about that thing down there.
This is supposedly. He kept Polaroid pictures of various victims down there, and he went down there to, whatever.
So they did know about that place then.
Well, what I've read is that he had a storage locker on the back of the unit, and were there storage lockers, like, do you know what I mean?
Not that I knew about.
Okay, so that
basement thing, I never went down it because the way it was explained to me is it kind of belonged to the apartment house manager, which was Ted.
Okay.
So we never went down there. But
so you didn't have any kind of storage units?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
And then later, after he'd been arrested and stuff, I ended up changing apartments, and I moved up to the one directly above me because my girlfriend and I split up, and then I wanted a smaller place, and I took the one up above.
Okay.
But another weird thing that happened, after the very first girl got murdered, there was some and I'm trying to remember if I got it from my friend Tom Dent, who lived next door to Haywood, but there were details about how gruesome the killing was, and I knew about it. And anyway, we had a house party, and we used to have a lot of parties. Okay, and we'd go out to dinner and have, you know, decent dinner and drink wine. There were all kinds of times we got together as a house. But there was the guy that lived upstairs threw a house party, and it was completely full of people and neighbors next door, and there were a bunch of friends, and Bundy was there. But as we got liquored up a bit, then all of a sudden we talked about this killing that was in the news. And as the details came out and everybody started to hear about how gruesome it was, the guy that rented or that had that apartment, it was his apartment, he was pretty hammered at the time, and he made the comment that we ought to get our guns and go out and find the killer.
Right.
And Bundy was right there. There were all the guys in the party were grouped together talking about it, and Bundy was right there. And I remember looking at him, and he was like smiling, and he was saying, you know, hey, that's a great idea. We ought to go hunt for the killer.
Oh, wow.
And years later, I just would, you know, after they arrested him, I always remember how weird that was, thinking that there we were talking about it, and he was there, part of our group.
And he was kind of in that conversation, like, hey.
Oh, exactly. He was just right in the middle of it, and he was egging us on, and it was almost comical, you know, when you think about it after the fact.
In hindsight, yeah.
Wow. In hindsight.
That's crazy. Which apartment was he in?
Bundy was in the upstairs, but so you're looking at the house head on. Bundy's was upstairs and on the right-hand side.
That's right. That's what I thought.
And it was in the front. There was another apartment in the back that was kind of like in the middle. So when you walked up the stairs, the door for that apartment was right in the middle. And the guy that lived there was just a total dope fiend.
Okay.
You could go there any day, any night, and knock on his door, and he'd open the door, and there's just the whole hallway would fill up with smoke. He always just sat and smoked pot. He was a nice guy and everything, but. And we used to have parties on the front porch. So when you looked at the house, you know, the doorway to get into the apartment in the middle that serviced, you know, all the apartments except for mine, that had a porch right there where the front door was. And at the time, we had like a couch and some chairs out there. So every night when we got home from work, it was a pretty common place for everybody to just gather and have a drink and roll a joint and, you know, get relaxed for the evening.
Right.
So across the street directly across the street was from our house, there was a parking lot and an insurance company.
Yeah.
Well, and it just so happened that there was a girl next door, and this would have been, if you're looking at the house, it would have been to the left side of the house where there's a bunch of apartments. There was a girl and the guy there that were friends with people in our house, and they knew Ted. But she worked in that insurance building across the street, and she informed us, and she told Ted, is actually who she told, that the FBI had set up surveillance and they were watching the apartment. So we came home one day and we're all out on the porch, and Ted comes up and he tells us he's warning us to be careful what we're doing because the house is being watched. But he didn't allude to the fact that he'd just been arrested by Bob Hayward.
Right.
We didn't know any of that stuff. And at the time, I was living with my girlfriend, and her brother was a runaway from Florida. And I immediately thought, you know, I'm an idiot, so I thought the FBI were trying to nail the runaway, and they were going to arrest me. I had no idea that Ted Bundy had been wrapped up in any of this stuff, so that came out later.
Were you around when they were doing any of the investigation in his apartment, which would have been, I believe, in around...
Well, you know, I worked full time, and I'd come home at times, and there were, in fact, after it happened, there were news people all around and all that kind of stuff. But I remember cops being there at times.
Okay.
But we kind of tried to stay clear of it all.
So you spent some time hanging out with Bundy off and on with some of these porch parties and house parties.
Oh yeah, yeah. We had several times when we go out to dinner as just a house group that kind of thing. And
Do you know anything about his affiliation with the church?
That's really weird because when I knew him, he had none. But then it was like after he got arrested, it was almost, when I heard that, I almost thought that maybe he was just trying to do it to get, people that might be on the jury or that kind of thing to think that, okay, he's a Mormon, so how could he do this?
Right.
I always wondered about that because there's no way that Bundy I knew, there would have been no way he would have been wrapped up in the church. So I always wondered what that was all about.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about that. I've uncovered some things about him being involved in a singles ward at the U, and some.
Oh, okay.
Which when you think about it, really isn't that surprising. Talk about wolf in the
Yep.
hen house,
And the other thing, the girl that lived on the lower level, right behind the porch. So when you walked in the front door, she had the very first apartment on the left. So she was right below Bundy. She was in love with him.
On the right.
And I know that
on the right hand side,
yep.
You mean?
Yeah, and I think that there's mention of her in Ann Rule's book. She's talking about there was a girl that lived in the house with us that was attracted to him.
Uh-huh.
She took it really hard. I mean, after they arrested him and stuff, I remember she had like a mental breakdown or something. She was really, smitten with him.